you know, I mean, I don't think this is.
Are we ready?
We're ready.
AIT, are we ready?
All right.
Thank you. Okay, let me call the meeting to order. Roll call, please.
Bart,
Here.
Bart. Jim.
He's zooming.
Nellie,
Here.
Candy,
Here.
Kathy,
Here.
Nancy,
Here.
Dave. Here. Barbara,
Here.
Beth,
Here.
Bev,
Here.
Joe,
Here.
Scott.
Yes, here.
Okay, the agenda has been out. Is there any changes to it or did entertain a motion to accept it?
Well, we accept the agenda. Now let's second it.
Okay, Nancy moved to accept and Barbara seconded. Those in favor signify by raising a hand. Unanimous. We have two guests over here. And I'm gonna take just a minute before I go to the next item and ask you to tell us who you are and welcome you to our work session.
Thank you, Dale Howard, and I'm one of the candidates for the board for next year.
Okay,
And I'm April Dillard as well, a candidate for the board
great,
of the election.
great. We're glad you could come.
Thank you.
Okay, the first item that we have on our agenda is the capital improvement program finance policy recommendation for FAC. Nancy, is this the one that you gave us today or is this not?
Oh, well, it's in your packet, but this is the corrected.
This
part.
one's corrected.
Yeah, that I just gave
Number
you.
3. Okay, so the thing she handed out today is the corrected copy.
This was like, page 22, would it, like.
So it should be page 17 through 26.
Jackie is this copy. 72.
We
Jackie is
use
this
it.
copy.
Yep, use the new
copy. All right.
Okay, so Scott, you're on.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, thanks.
But I wanted to just add on a totally different topic. We changed venues today. We're in room 2 instead of the auditorium. And if the request from us and staff is, we would really like to make this our normal work session room because it's a lot less staff intensive. We don't have to set up the entire auditorium. We don't have the entire IT staff sitting there with us. And it's frankly, I think it's nicer to have a work session talking across a table from each other. I think it's just more effective.
Okay.
So if it's all right with you, we'd rather this kind of be the standard practice going forward, unless there's a big item on the agenda and we need extra space, then we move into the auditorium. But I think this just makes more sense and it's really more efficient with staff
And
or
could-
staff.
Could, just an idea, if we're gonna meet in here, maybe we could just do like, make it more square instead of so
Sure,
long. So
Yeah.
that we can,
that makes good
3 on
sense.
each side and then you'll have more room for chairs.
Sure.
But it has to
Mic,
be.
so it might be awkward, but I'll ask.
Oh, okay.
You're not, I don't think your room is wide enough for that.
Yeah, I think, I don't see how you can.
We'll look at it. We'll just see what we can do. I mean,
Good idea.
a square would be best if we can make that work. But,
Always works better.
but I get it. The nice thing is at least we're somewhat facing each other, whereas in the auditorium, we're really not.
Yeah.
So, all right, well, thank you. I appreciate that. And it's definitely a more efficient way of doing it. And I think more effective too. Anyway, this has been a long process. As you can tell, the board approved a pilot program there's a copy of that in your packet here, but they approved that in September of 23. This came about because there really wasn't any process on the books on how capital projects, what the process is for reviewing them, deciding them, what were the expectations from the board to me and to staff on what was going to be presented so that you could make informed decisions on how to move forward. So we worked with the board back in 23 on coming up with a pilot program. And it was adopted by the board and we used that pilot program throughout the next year. And as we did, we learned that there were issues and challenges with it that really didn't fulfill some of the other issues and expectations. So we've we fine tuned it as the 2 years actually went by. When we were putting together the 24 budget, which was right after this was the pilot was adopted, we made some changes immediately already because we had heard already feedback. And then when we were putting together the 25 budget just this last fall, we had really used what is before you today as the template. So the pilot was in place, but I would say we put more criteria in place when we put together the updated 5-year capital plan and capital budget, the assessment process, the forms, all of that has been updated. The format that is before you is designed to fit right into the CPM. In fact, when we took this to the Fiscal Affairs Committee, and we actually took this to the FAC last June, if you can believe it. So it has just taken a long time to get to today, as things often do. But it's been good. I mean, we've been able to really fine tune it, I think, and to recommend a real solid policy before you. But again, we were able to really take a look at these and apply these new procedures and practices when we put together the 25 budget this year. So it's been a long process. On the 19th of 24, the FAC did recommend to the board that they consider approving the capital improvement program and capital budget policy for inclusion into the CPM. And I just want to highlight a few items because there is new language and there's some stricken language, but I kind of thought it might be easiest to work with the clean copy, but we can also look at the red line if you'd like, whatever's easiest for you. But the clean copy starts on page 22.
Except we have to go over here, so they might not have numbers.
No.
Yeah.
Okay, well then the one before you. Thank you. Yes, there you
Yeah.
go.
Talking about.
The clean one. Is that clean?
That's 22.
Yours is clean. Nellie's looks like a red line.
But that's got the corrections in it.
It has some corrections.
It's all been corrected.
We don't need- we don't need
the
this.
corrected
It's all
one,
picked
that's
out.
red line and clean.
Oh,
Are there emphasizes?
You can take Bart's
On
packet.
the paper.
Oh, I see. It's behind it.
I'll give it to
Okay,
you.
I got it. Okay. Okay, I'm still.
It was- There's a copy right there for you.
Yeah.
A few too many copies,
Oh.
but, and I'm sorry for that. I missed a few things. I missed the December FAC meetings. David and Howie and Nellie provided me some language right after that meeting. And I missed some of it when I was updating this final draft. And then I had a conversation with Nellie and Kathy on Sunday, who take very good notes, and said, you've missed a few things. So we all worked on Sunday and finalized this so that you could actually have a correct draft as soon as possible. Nothing major, just some minor things that really did need to be included. But there's always been some questions about what is a capital budget, what is a capital improvement plan? And so this policy starts off by talking about what that is. That's really the very first paragraph in here, number 1. A capital budget, that is the annual appropriation for the capital projects and acquisitions. We're actually spending money in the budget. Whereas the capital improvement plan is a forecast of major capital projects over a selected period of time. GVR has chosen to use 5 years as a selected period of time, which is frankly pretty standard. Anything that is a capital budget is defined as over $5,000 and has a annual life of greater than, a life expectancy of greater than a year. The first year of the capital improvement program, so you've got a 5-year plan. The first year of the plan becomes the budget. That becomes the capital budget. In here, we've added language, both shall be prepared and adopted as part of the annual budget process. Board approval of the capital improvement program indicates not only board's acceptance of the capital improvement program, but also its recognition that the document represents the general direction that the organization plans to take in the future. general is a really important word there because I think we all recognize that things change.
Page 22.
Priorities change, funding changes, needs change, demands change. So it's a general recognition, but at least it's a plan. And that's something that we've heard for quite some time is something gets on the plan and then the next year it comes off, clubs get frustrated, et cetera. So at least here we have a plan, but we have to recognize it's organic. It can be changed. In the pilot, there were definitions of a type 1 and a type 2 type cost. That hasn't changed. That's the same. But I did want to say, remember in the pilot, we were very specific and said a type 1 is something that would happen in the current year. It wasn't budgeted. We didn't plan for it. This would be something that a club could say, hey, we could use a $10,000 widget. Or staff could say, hey, this wasn't budgeted. We could really use a $5,000 widget. And we had pretty specifically said that the board shall allocate $100,000 annually for that. This was drafted before we had the setback in the home sales where we lost a significant amount of money. I shouldn't say lost it. We just didn't receive it. And so what we've done is changed the language so that it's a little bit more flexible.
You're on page 2, right?
I'm on, yeah, this would be page 2. The very first sentence says each year, when the budget allows, GVR will earmark an identified amount in the non-reserve capital budget. So that gives the board flexibility. If you want to do 50,000, you can do that. If you want to do 150,000, you can do that. But it really gives you the ability as a board to take a look at where we're at financially. And if you have some money to spend and times are good, then you maybe want to allocate a little bit more. And when times aren't so good, you're not required to do it. Yes, Beth.
So you said that we implemented this past year, but
23.
but it's my understanding that there were no type 1 projects last.
That's right. So last year was 24.
24.
And in 24 is when we really started to see things decline with our housing sales. But this pilot program was adopted in the fall of 23. And we hadn't really seen
Right.
yet how
So
those.
we haven't really tried this type 1 yet. We haven't really had the process.
We really haven't, yeah, which was unfortunate. Who would have been able to predict that? But yeah. And so even for this year, because we're now in the 25 budget, we did not budget any dollars in the non-reserve capital for type 1 for the same reasons. We're hoping next year we can do that. We do have some items in non-reserve capital, but we didn't budget kind of a blank line item of 100,000 or another amount for a contingency for something that just might happen to come up. We just didn't have the luxury this year. We're hoping next year.
Right.
So type 2, for those of you that weren't part of that process then, are really the longer term projects. This is where we're really talking about bigger projects, the 5-year capital plan, expanding the lapidary, improving the fitness center, finalizing the Del Sol clubhouse, things that really take more time. And here's a process now that lays that out. The assessment phase, we're on the next page, hasn't really changed too much. It's a little bit different. In the process for assessing type 2 capital projects, we get down into, you can see there are 3 bullets there. They're a little bit more specific on actually following process now, where we go to the P&E. The P&E develops a recommendation on capital projects. They forward that to the board. And then staff brings that recommendation as well as staff's recommendations to the FAC. And then the FAC develops a recommendation on the funding for those projects. So we've tried to spell that out here. so that it's really clear what steps we're following. And then you can see on the next page, project planning. This is really when the projects begin. January 1 is the beginning of our fiscal year. And that's when the money becomes available. So that's really when projects begin. You work on the budget in the fall, you approve it in October, November. In December, the ball's rolling. And in fact, the ball has been rolling because you've got a metal arts building down here. We got a permit for it this last week, which is great. You'll remember this is an
Yes.
initiatives fund project. $150,000 was allocated for that. So now that we have a permit, we're going out for bid.
Good.
Since it's initiatives, we're gonna have to come to the board and have the board approve that contract. We had put this on for January 22nd. I don't think we'll have the bids in by then. If we did, great, we'll be able to do that, but I don't think we will. But the good news is construction documents are done, permit is done, we're going out for bid. The pool, I wanted to give you a quick update on that. If you remember, that's being funded through the MRRB fund. It was, I think, 2 meetings ago. I essentially asked the board to give me a blank check for MRRB for Desert Hills, and the board agreed. Amazing. So we did go out for bid on that. Remember, we wanted to get an expert to come in and map out and do the construction documents for the new piping, new filters, et cetera. So we got 2 bids. We're giving a bid to the lowest bidder. There was a company that had one company, they kind of split up and created 2. One came in lower than the other, and that's who we're gonna go with. So that was about a $47,000 award for them. Once that's finished, we'll have construction documents once again, and we'll be able to go out for bid for any type of work that needs to be done on that pool.
So right now, we don't know if there's any work to be done.
We do know there's work to be done.
But we don't know what
Absolutely.
it is.
Well, we've got some recommendations on fixing some of the piping and plumbing and filters and that type of
I
thing.
mean, didn't we thought we had a leak or something?
Yeah, and
That's
there did, and one of the first companies that we talked with was pretty sure there was a leak.
Okay,
But after subsequent testing, bucket tests, vacuum tests, dye tests, we determined there wasn't any leak,
okay.
which is great news. So we're still pretty sure that we're not going to have to replace the pool or do
Okay.
major repairs on the pool.
Okay.
But there's definitely plumbing that needs to be fixed and improved. And it's definitely going to require a permit. We need construction documents to be able to do that.
Thank you.
Yeah, so once we get those construction documents, we'll be able to go out to a bidder and have a contractor actually bid on making those improvements. We're hoping it's just in the pump room and it's not under the deck to
Do
make
we have
those
it
changes.
isolated to the pump room?
It seems that that's the case,
Okay,
but I think we'll know more when the construction documents are actually done.
okay.
So then we're really talking about pulling money from the Part A fund, the repair and maintenance fund for the.
Good, I mean, that's a really good
Part B.
point. I think anything that would qualify for MRRA will be funded through MRRA. Since MRRB is usually replacement.
Right.
Maybe some other things that aren't carried or paid for from MRRB. And that'll be another discussion that we're gonna have in a few weeks.
So it's $47,000 just for them to plan everything and figure out what we need?
Absolutely. I know,
Yeah. And that's without construction done.
that's correct.
That's-
That's to help create them. Yeah, that's to create the construction
Okay.
documents. Yeah.
And then if it goes past, once we get past that, jumps over to the MRRB,
If, well, if, right,
out of
if it's
pool
all.
and into the regular.
Yeah, and I'm not sure I have not misspoken here. I'm kind of thinking that 47,000 was for the lapidary architect.
Okay, yeah, it's
So-
awful high.
So I might, one of you grimaced and I thought, you could be right. I might just, let me back up. I'll send you an email and let you know, but I think that might have been for lapidary expansion for architecture work. And we're actually coming to the board on January 22nd to ask you to award a contract for that, and that will come out of initiatives. The Trident, it's a company named Trident. Now it's about $15,000.
No, that's been-
That's embarrassing. I'm really sorry. I'm really sorry. That's what happened when I talk off the top of my head, but it's about 15 for that. It's about 47 for the construction documents
Okay.
for the lapidary
All
expansion.
right,
He does
Hopefully
this-
that's a little
He
better.
does this to us every now and then to see if I listen.
Well, you guys are paying attention, so I think that's a great sign, you know. Thank you for that. All right. So the other thing on this that, the very last page is the miscellaneous section. And we went back and forth on this a little bit, but the last sentence says, funding for approved or in progress capital projects carry over from one year to the next until completion. This was kind of a challenge because there were some questions previously about a project. And there was some concerns and questions that the board hadn't approved funding in a particular year for that project to move forward. Whereas the board had actually approved funding in the previous consecutive years. So there were questions about, does the board need to reapprove that if those dollars haven't been expended yet, or if the project hasn't been completed yet? So we had a big discussion with the FAC on that, and the FAC felt like if the board has already approved it, particularly if it's already a project in construction and it's just not finished, they were very concerned that a future board could just end construction. And there's some real issues with that because you still have a legal contract that you've signed with your contractor, so it's not all that easy to get out of. But the FAC agreed and staff agreed that if the board has previously approved that, then it is approved. And it does not need to be reapproved by the board.
But it doesn't really hold water. It doesn't, I mean, if you haven't started the project, but we've approved it and you roll to the next board, shouldn't they have to go back through the process to drop it? Or shouldn't they have a process to drop it?
Why?
Well, I'm just concerned that if we have a project that we approve, and Scott and the staff have not gotten it started by the time we have the new board take effect, they can by vote
Yeah.
drop that project, right? Is that right, Nellie?
So,
She's giving me that, what are you talking about?
I mean, this is about,
Wheels all the time.
this is really about budgeting. So, what David and I have done in previous years is make sure that those funds are available in the next year. If things hadn't been expended or if a contract hadn't even been approved yet, we make sure that those dollars roll over into the next year. At least that's what we've done. Now, again, there were some questions about, well, does the board need to reapprove that? So we went back and forth on having the language in here to say, yes, the board needs to reapprove it annually. And then there were pros and cons of that and ultimately landed on, no, once funding has been approved, it's been approved. However, if the contract hasn't been approved, I mean, the board still has to approve a construction document, contract. So even if you've allocated funds out of the budget for that, which you have, I mean, so lapidary, for example, there's $991,000 budgeted this year. You have not been asked to approve a contract yet.
Right.
You still have to be asked two things. One, you have to approve the architectural contract, and then we're going to ask you to approve the construction contract at points in the future. So there are those opportunities for future boards if a contract hasn't been approved yet. But this is about the funding in the budget. So if one board approves funding in the budget and that board has approved it and we're moving forward with, we've already got, say, The architect's on board. We're working on permitting. We just haven't gone out for bid yet because maybe construction documents took too long. Does that dollar amount for that project need to be reallocated, even though it's already been budgeted? And once it's allocated, I mean, we start spending dollars on, architectural fees,
Right.
permits, engineers, that type of thing. So those dollars are being spent once the board approves that. And that's by us following this capital project policy and process. So I don't know if that makes sense or tries to clear it up.
That's how it works.
Yeah.
I think that's.
Well, if Joe's nodding his head yes, then I understand.
Thank you. Thank you, Joe.
You'll have it. How it works.
All right, thank you. That's pretty common. Yeah,
Yeah.
I mean,
So,
that's,
so Scott, let me make
really
sure I do
common.
understand. Say Metal Arts, we approved Metal Arts,
Mhm,
and you did not get anything done this year on Metal Arts.
mhm.
So you would put it in the budget for next year. And we would approve it for the new budget. Would approve
No,
it.
no,
The money-
It's already
This is
been
money.
approved.
The money was already approved.
It's already been
So
approved.
we've already approved the money and you just roll the money forward.
Right.
Right.
Okay, and then Joe comes on the board and he says, I don't wanna move Metal Arts, I don't wanna spend 150 grand.
Too
So,
late. Too bad. Too bad.
is it
Too
Yeah.
at
bad.
that point?
Yeah.
Well, I think it's too bad because the money's been approved, but again, you still haven't approved a contract.
Right.
So if Joe's
Right.
really
Right.
unhappy about this, he can vote no on the contract.
Exactly.
Okay, all right, I'm with
But,
you
but
now.
you've already
Yeah.
spent
Okay.
money on the architects up
Yeah.
to that
Yeah.
point too, before the
Yeah.
contract.
Sure.
You have to have the architect and the permitting before you get to the contract. So all of that was already approved with the initial,
The initial approval in the budget.
initial approval, yeah. So
Okay.
it's not like you haven't spent any money. You have,
And I think in the,
and that's important.
in the
Yeah.
budget process that we saw this year, we saw we saw the projects as they were specifically identified calendar year 2024 that had the dollar amount carried forward. So we knew those, we had already kind of spent money. This was just a carryover balance that was left.
Okay.
And then
okay.
there, calendar year 25, we listed new projects, and those were really the ones that the P and E committee focused on.
Right.
And rated. So you were able to see the full list of the money that was needed to
Yeah.
fulfill a total
Sure.
capital
Right.
budget. So it
Right.
Yeah,
really
and
did
we need
make
to show
sense.
that
We did
where,
show that, right.
even though dollars were previously approved, we have to, for cash flow purposes, we have to be able to show we anticipate spending it in 24 or 25, even though it was approved in 23.
Okay,
Yeah.
so if it started now, like you've started working on Metal Arts now, your report to us would be, we've got, this done and this done, and so we as a board all know, and then Joe comes on the board as the new guy, and we say, no, we've already put money in it, go away. Yeah, go away.
That's right.
Here's the dog.
Go under the table.
Yeah, no, that makes sense, I was just trying to
Okay.
figure out, because I have seen boards in the past where things have just kind of disappeared.
Right, and that's
Yeah.
what we're
So
trying to.
That's what we're
Trying to
trying to
stop.
avoid.
Okay, okay.
You know, now if
Madam
the
Chair, I want
construction
to-
cost, like Scott said, if the construction cost comes in and it's well over $1 million, you can vote no.
Yeah.
We
on it,
can vote
Yeah.
no,
You know, and then you say, whoa,
Sure.
yeah.
okay.
Yeah,
But you
and I
gotta
mean,
start somewhere to get.
And the board will just be kept up to
Yeah.
date by this, so
Yeah.
that we all know. And when the new board members come in, we'll get them updated. Okay, got it. I'm with you.
right.
I need where.
And, you can see how complicated this is just by the nature of this discussion.
Yeah.
And this is why we needed a policy.
Absolutely.
Because there were different expectations, different ideas on how things should be done, and there wasn't agreement. So this gives us a real clear, bright line in the sand on this is what the expectation is, this is the policy, this is the process.
Yep, that's good though.
Can at some point, not too distant past, there was talk about getting rid of the P and E as a committee. And now, in this process, it is embedded in this process.
I knew you'd catch that.
Just a question.
Yeah. I think if that does move forward, the nice thing about CPM changes is they are pretty quick changes. You could even, I didn't want to assume anything, certainly when we drafted this. You learn in this business, don't assume a thing. I mean, you could even amend the language now so that it's a little bit more flexible and just say a committee. I don't think so. I think we just leave it the way it is. And if that does move forward, then we come back and strike this language.
Yeah.
And just amend it so that it's consistent.
Yep.
But that's a great point.
When we looked at this as Scott has said, when we started in June, we had a flip packet. To remember our finance policies and it include check writing and the budget timetable and that, and we felt it was important to let's separate out capital part. Like we moved actually, if you remember last month, the other finance policies. And then we intentionally wanted to deal with this one separately because the capital budget is a separate process from the operating budget. So this, I think, cleans it up quite a bit. And it really is, as Scott says, reinforces what we've been doing this year as far as proposals that were coming in. So overall, it's really good language.
I'm gonna ask a really stupid question. When we developed this with your help, it was because there wasn't really anything that gave us the steps that the staff had to take. And so it was a pilot program over a year. And so my question is, are you, with these changes, do you feel as staff that they meet the needs for staff? I mean, are you okay with it the way you're proposing it before we put it into the CPM?
Absolutely. Absolutely. David and I have worked together on it. Natalie and I have worked together on it. We've all reviewed it. We've all fine-tuned it. We agree. We would much rather have a clear set of policies that we all agree on so that there's no questions, there's no ambiguity, but it works. It works for us. It works for the committees. I think it works for the boards. It provides certainty for a lot of people, clubs, the board staff, and that's something I think that we've really lacked is that certainty.
The FAC, one of the changes we made was, I think the pilot program had the actual application and as an appendix to it. And we took that out because that's, if anything, that's where you may have some tweaks and changes that you
Sure.
want to make, and it just doesn't belong in a policy manual. It's an operational
Mhm.
issue. So we struck that language and said, that's really staff responsibility, tweak it, but you need to follow the policy part and the technical application part. Can be
Okay,
adjusted.
so what you're saying is chair of the FAC committee,
Yes,
your committee's happy with what this is being changed to, and
that's
we're ready
correct.
to go forward.
It was almost unanimous consent on this policy. We looked at it 3 times, 3 different
Okay.
times.
And then maybe on the operational side, who does this go to? Who looks at it?
Well, we've got a few people. I mostly oversee initiatives projects, which are the big capital ones. Much of this doesn't apply to MRR because that's kind of dealt with separately. So our project management team, which is in facilities, needs to follow this process in terms of, we get concept drawings, then we go to the board for approval. Then we go out for bid to get construction documents. Then we do the construction documents, then our project management team, me, David in finance, the facilities department. That's operationally who is really going to be looking at this policy.
So my question is, so who on the project management team do you submit a request for a project? Who do they send this to?
Oh, so that's just requesting. The requests come, usually if it's say a club, we're going to be sending out. There's the capital on here, it says attachment 5, capital improvement project assessment. This is the assessment tool that Nellie was just talking about that isn't being asked to be approved, but it's more operational. But this is essentially the application that we're going to be sending out to clubs very soon, saying, now's the time to put in your requests for the 26 budget. And here are the steps that you need to take, and here's the criteria that we're looking for. Anybody can fill one of these out, though. Anybody can submit a request.
But who would they give it to, Natalie or somebody else? That's my.
You know, it kind of depends on who it is. If it's a member that just has some interest, they may reach out to a board member. A board member most likely would probably reach out to me. Staff is always coming up with ideas on how things can be improved. So when we're putting together the budget, we start looking at the capital budget in late summer usually. We'll sit around the table and talk about, these are the things that we think we need in order to move the organization forward. And then that's when we really start to put together the capital budget and the capital plan. We're looking at cash flows and those kinds of things. So in terms of staff, we're doing that at the end of September. Clubs are going to submit this. Board members may have ideas. Members may have ideas, and you know, anybody can submit something like that, I think. And if there's a lot of interest, in the past, it's all gone through the P&E, and we can still do that. But usually this kind of stuff is historically been brainstormed with the P&E committee, not entity, I'm sorry, with the P&E committee. Doesn't have to, though.
So it goes, all right, somebody comes to me and says, I'm in pickleball and our board is looking at, we'd like to put in for X, Y, and Z. How do I do that? And I tell them to fill out the form. Who do I tell them to give it to? You or Natalie, or
I would generally just say,
drop it at the front office?
there is a club liaison. Since it's club related, we try to direct any club activities to the club liaison so that it's all funneled to one person. One of the best things to do if you don't know the answer is have, I mean, you
call
can
you.
tell them, I'll get back to you. Sure, you can contact me. That happens half the time anyway, which is fine. But the hotline works great. If people have questions or comments, they can submit those to the hotline. That's a
Okay.
great place. We used to have suggestion boxes. I think we do still in some places. And you can certainly bring a suggestion. But yeah, you shouldn't be involved. You don't need to be involved in the forms or that kind of thing. If someone has a request, they may bring it to you and you could say, hey, someone brought this to me. We could take that, as we often do, to P&E and brainstorm. Here's some things that we heard this year. What do you as a committee, if we don't have a P&E, it would be, what do you as the board think of these? And then we'll go through a process where you prioritize what your projects are.
So Scott, how do you reach those people who might not be a club member or may even be a club member and don't know that they need to go through their club? But there may be members out there that have ideas for something they would like to see us do.
Sure.
With maybe not coming to any individual board member.
Sure.
How do we reach those people to let them know we have a process? Because we know they don't necessarily go into the CPM to look for the process.
Yeah, and I mean, it needs to be a reasonable process too. I mean, there's no way it's going to be reasonable. We've got 23,000 members.
Right.
I mean, can you imagine even if we got 100 or 1,000 of these to assess? That's really why we do the strategic plan every 5 years. That's really, members always have an opportunity to do input, but every 5 years, we do a major survey of the members to really find out what their interests are. Are they happy, unhappy? What don't you like? What do you like? What are your interests? What would make this place better? Those kinds of things. And so the strategic plan informs this process. We're usually not surprised by questions or things that come up. If it makes sense and we've heard it before, it's in the strategic plan, then staff, the committee, the board a board member will usually say, hey, this is a great idea. We should really consider this. But it's the strategic plan, I think, where members have most of their input. It's a big survey. It's scientific. It's not, it's random, so it's not self-selected. You know, those that just, it's not the pickleball club or the tennis club, all, you know, voting as much as they can. People are randomly selected so that it is defendable, and it makes sense. And so you get to do that in 26, by the way. We've got a big strategic planning process in 26. But I think that's probably the most accurate way to determine really what the members' interests are. And then based on that, we start to put together the goals, the objectives, the action plan on how we're going to meet all of those demands and expectations.
So these are mostly clubs that would respond to these. So
Clubs,
when you
I
send
think
it out,
most
you
of them-
say, turn it back into your club or turn it back into the club
Yeah.
liaison?
yeah, they'll work as a board, they'll do whatever they do within their club. And they'll send them to our club liaison, Kathy Edwards, at this spring at some point. And then we'll start the assessment process as we're working up towards the summer, the end of summer, when we're starting to put together the capital requests. Now, remember, I mean, there are requirements in the CPM that are very clear that the club is responsible for certain things. There's even language in there that the club may contribute financially to an expansion or something, but generally equipment that is the club, a grinder, for example, that's usually the club's responsibility. So usually any requests like that, and we don't even get requests like that anymore because I think clubs know that that's their responsibility. But sometimes we'll get a request like that and it doesn't necessarily qualify. A wind sail or some screening, we get a lot of requests for screening over pools, over walkways, over pickleball courts, tennis courts. Those kinds of things usually come in from the club. Maybe a better filter system. Or this year, we've got a gas manifold on the East Center Lapidary building. So that's a capital project. And that came in through this process last year.
I had somebody at Canoa Hills ask me, they wanted to put a hammock. And I told them, I said, hey, have at it. And I said, just go through the hotline. I don't know if they did or not, but. You know,
Never heard.
yeah, okay.
Just put it up and then ask forgiveness later.
Hey,
I said that out loud.
Are there any trees out there?
It just might. You know, if the worst thing that happens is a hammock gets put up, that's a good day.
It's if they put 5 on the house, right?
Yeah.
Yes. But I think that's a great, I mean, the hotline is a great place to send those because it's all funneled into our communications department and then it goes out to the appropriate staff. It'll go out to the board depending on what it is. And then she'll get the information back and then it goes back to that member if it's a question that requires an answer. So that's always good. You can always, you know, contact me if you're really just not sure what to do. I mean, we're here to serve you. All right, so I think that's it for the policy. It's complicated, but it's not at the same time. It's
So will you
taken,
be bringing this, for a vote to the next meeting?
yeah, we've got it tentatively scheduled for the 22nd of January for the board to consider approving this. And if the board does, then we will put it into the CPM and update it online and it'll become a new
And I think
policy.
after you read the new and improved version, if you have questions, get in touch with Scott.
Yeah, if there are questions, please contact.
Okay, the next one is the corporate policy manual change to smoking and vaping policy. Scott, were you gonna do that?
Well, I will. I didn't know if Bart wanted to do it. I
Bart,
don't
you
want to
wanna
step on
do
his
it for mom?
toes.
Is there a policy?
I'll do it.
Is it in here?
Bart's doing it.
Bart's doing
It
it.
was in the meeting.
I
Page
noticed that Scott was getting a little bit hoarse there.
Not this.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Appreciate it.
Page 32 in your packet.
So we've, GVR has banned smoking inside the buildings for many years. And that ban has essentially tracked the language of the Arizona statute, which is referenced somewhere in there. But lately, the thought has been, well, maybe we should ban smoking not only inside the buildings, but on GVR property generally, both inside and out. And since vaping was banned
I think that's the problem.
inside buildings, then the survey that GVR sent out lumped smoking and vaping together and asked members if they wanted to ban it on GVR property as a whole. And the survey response, the numbers are in there someplace. I don't have it in front of me, but
83%, yeah, 88%.
yeah, it was overwhelmingly that they wanted to do that. Although I will point out, as I pointed out before, the survey didn't give respondents an opportunity to split out vaping from smoking. But anyway, at our BAC meeting, we took the issue up, and the Board Affairs Committee voted, whatever it was, 7 or 8 to 1, to forward to the board a recommendation that smoking and vaping both be banned on all GVR property. And therefore, that is the recommendation of the BAC. Now, the one guy, and he's a really intelligent and very handsome member of the BAC, who voted no, was me. But I certainly acknowledge that there seems to be pretty, I think I can safely say, overwhelming support to ban all of that stuff on GVR property. There's a reference, and and because I don't have the stuff in front of me, I don't know if it's still there, but there's a reference to the Arizona statute that's proposed to go into the CPM language. This is the new language saying pursuant to Arizona statute, whatever. But I want to emphasize that that's pretty misleading, because the Arizona statute doesn't address vaping at all. So if GVR chooses to ban vaping, which it's certainly within its rights to do, as well as smoking, that's not really driven by anything in Arizona statutes. That's just a decision on the part of the GVR board. So with all of that as background, are there any questions?
Yeah, I think
Well, I asked for it to be put on the agenda for the work session. Because I had a number of people that questioned having to close all 17 facilities to smoking and vaping. I know nothing about vaping, so I left that to Bart, because I absolutely know nothing about vaping. However,
Well, I'll tell you what I learned in this process, and that is that there is so far no documented or researched harm that arises from secondhand vaping. The reason for that is pretty clear. It's pretty clear that it's less harmful than smoking, because you don't have the products of combustion, and it's the products of combustion that tend to cause the most health problems. Now, having said that, there's no evidence yet that secondhand vaping is harmful. There's certainly the possibility that at some point, some research someplace will show that. And in fact, at the Mayo Clinic site, there's what is to me kind of an amusing comment from some Mayo Clinic staffer saying, well, there's no proof that secondhand vaping is harmful, but it probably is. That's not really science. That's just an opinion, a somewhat prejudiced opinion, perhaps, on the part of somebody at the Mayo Clinic. But nevertheless, as I say, whether there's any harm caused by secondhand vaping, no proof yet. But again, it seems like there's strong support in among the GVR membership to ban it. So there you have it.
So
You have
If
any
I-
other questions?
if I could go on. As I understood it at the BAC meeting, most of the complaints that were coming in were primarily from the open air facilities, let's say. The statutes that we have been following are Arizona statutes as they pertain to no smoking in the buildings or within 20 feet of the door or ventilation or a window. And I'm fine with that, and I think everybody recognizes that. That's been since 2006. But Bart is right, the way that this is written for the policy, it says pursuant to this smoke-free Arizona, GVR prohibits smoking, vaping in all GVR campuses. The policy Arizona-wide does not say all campuses or all places. They just speak to the 20 feet that you have to stay away and that you can't smoke within the buildings. And I'm fine with that. I don't have a question. But these areas that are the open air facilities, I did ask Nellie, because I don't play pickleball and understand that a number of complaints had come in from the pickleball, racquetball, volleyball courts, all open air areas. So I asked Nellie if they had a designated smoking area for those people. And as far as I know, there is no designated area for these people to go to. It just seems to me that before we prohibit over 17 facilities, that we start with the designated area. These people that are smoking should have the common courtesy to step away from congregated areas of people that are not smoking, but apparently they're not. But it seems to me that if we had a designated area, we could say, you know, would you mind going over to the designated smoking area and try to deal with that first, just a second, before we get to prohibiting it everywhere. I do have a friend that goes outside to vape and more than 20 feet away from the front door when we're at a meeting. But if he had to go to the sidewalk, say, he's not gonna have enough time to get up there and back before the meeting is over. So, but he does always go beyond the 20 feet for his vaping. I don't think he smokes. But it just seems to me that we should try to start to prohibit something on the basis of a small group of people for everybody in town just doesn't seem appropriate to me. And so I would ask that we start first to designate areas for these people to go to, because I can fantasize that we will get code of conduct complaints numerously that our staff is going to have to deal with on an everyday basis. They have better things to do with their time than to deal with something like this, but it's going to be a constant type of thing, in my opinion. Maybe not, you know, but I would vote against this. I would hope that we could do something to designate areas first before we go to.
Scott, what would be we had designated smoking areas, but they've not been maintained.
Right, that was the whole issue, wasn't it? The
Yeah.
ordinance and the.
I don't know that there really ever were officially designated areas, which was kind of why this came up. And so they've never properly been outfitted with ashtrays, signs, that type of thing. There isn't a process for having staff do the rounds to pick up butts or that kind of thing. So that's just a process that hasn't happened. And the question of does it even need to happen came up. but because we had a few incidences that we had, received complaints about, that's
Right.
kind of why this came up, because we thought, well, do we need to designate something? That's gonna cost money. We're gonna have to create a space. We're gonna have to buy ashtrays. We're gonna have to have our staff now making sure that that's part of their
Have to buy
rounds.
benches, put benches out.
A bench, sure,
Why
shade
do we have to
structure,
provide benches? Why,
Yes.
what does it
Hammock.
take? 10, 15 minutes?
Well,
to
what-
smoke
I
a
mean-
a hammock.
Otherwise, if you don't have benches, if you don't have ashtrays,
If
I
I
mean,
may.
an ashtray just sitting by itself out in the middle of nowhere is a little strange too, but I mean, but we're asking whether people, whether staff is going to clean it up.
There-
It's really the
There
issue.
used to be at least one designated smoking area. I know because I walked past it every day that I played racquetball. It was right outside the racquetball facility
Right,
at
exactly.
Las Campanas. And it had one of those long necked ashtrays with the heavy thing at the bottom and where you stuck your cigarette butts. And obviously that had been purchased at some time by GVR.
And I had a bench, yeah.
That designated smoking area hasn't been there for at least a couple of years. It was certainly there from the time I got here 6 years ago until a couple of years ago. And I would occasionally see people smoking there, but it was pretty rare. But it's gone. And, that doesn't seem to have been a cataclysmic occurrence in GVR. I don't know that anybody misses it. But I would like to ask Scott, if he will, to elaborate a bit on the complaints as to whether it was complaints about people who were smoking or people who were vaping.
I have a question. If we could say no smoking is allowed, but vaping is allowed, you don't need an ashtray or a bench or anything for vaping because you're not putting out butts. So you don't need any equipment. You do need a sign. So if you want to allow vaping, you could do that.
So what were the complaints?
So my understanding is we received some complaints initially from someone in the billiards area that stepped out into the center courtyard here at West Center that was vaping, and they were vaping marijuana. And those that were,
That's a whole
I would have
different.
been out there.
that were within the area, didn't like the smell, they didn't want to smell it. And so we had a discussion internally, well, it's legal recreationally and we're a private organization. What category does this even fall under? So but the point is, we had received complaint about that, and the question was, well, what do we do about it? And the others have really been more in outdoor sports courts or outside of the racquetball facility that you mentioned at Las Campanas. There have been complaints there about people smoking and vaping, and they didn't like the smell or the whatever it was,
Right.
breathing it in, whether it was smoke or the scented vapor stuff. Tennis courts and pickleball courts, same thing. We received complaints. I wouldn't say we received a lot of complaints, but I know that we've received some complaints, generally outdoor sports courts, mostly vaping, where they'll just hold their little vape and go over to the corner sometimes, but because wind does what it does, it'll blow back onto the court or whatever, and then people start to confront one another and complain to us, and we're now having to manage the playground, and that becomes challenging. So those were some of the
Can I just
complaints.
say that Graham goes outside and, I mean, it doesn't matter whether it's a 20-foot. He goes out right outside the court, the racquetball court every time and vapes, and despite people suggesting that he go 20 feet away. So, I mean, I just think that maybe the simplest thing is to say no. I mean, I don't think vaping is, being around vaping is that bad. And like you say, it doesn't make a mess. But maybe just the simplest thing, again, if they're gonna put marijuana or whatever.
To the marijuana.
Or
Yeah,
some
there you
horrible
go.
strawberry
Let's leave it
smell or
alone.
some flavoring or something in them.
I'll
which-
stand next to you.
Maybe
when you
it's
bake
easier
the
to say, no,
marijuana.
just forget it, don't do it at all.
Me neither.
Well, and I will add, it did kind of seem like a non-issue to some degree because we really haven't seen a lot of people smoking or vaping. We've received a few complaints, and I think many of you probably recall some of the places that you did see people smoking were actually employees. On the
Yep.
back facility here at West Center, there was up on the second level Fiesta deck at Santa Rita Springs. There was a place that staff would smoke, and we eliminated that internally just by saying, as part of our personnel policy, you can't smoke as an employee on our campus or in our vehicles. And so we eliminated, I think, 90% of it right there. So it did seem kind of like a non-issue to go the next step and just say, we're not going to allow any smoking and vaping on the campus, because it doesn't seem like that many people do it. But
How many?
we just
Scott,
hadn't
how
received a
many-
lot of complaints,
How
so.
many complaints? Let me see if I can ask this so you can answer it. Have the number of complaints we've gotten been high enough to warrant us creating a whole new policy to deal with it? Or are we messing here with a very small minority of people? I mean, I've had people that say to me, look, I went from smoking to vaping and now I'm being ostracized and I'm being picked on because I can't even vape. Of course, he does that when he's playing tennis, so, on the tennis court, but.
Well,
Oh, yeah.
there you
So
go. I
said
mean,
you have to go to the vaping area, but
As-
there is no designated vaping area. And I just, my only concern is, are we creating a problem where there is none? Are there not enough people? I mean, if we have what, 20, how many, we have 16,000 houses, 23, 20.
we have about 13.5.
13.
Almost.
So of
23,000.
those, we've got maybe 3,000 that have said, no, we want it stopped. I mean, is that enough for the board to really create this policy, or?
It kind of came down to, do we want to spend the funds on creating designated areas? And when you do create a designated area, again, we've already observed that the wind doesn't really keep it in the designated area. So I'm not sure that those that are on the tennis court or the pickleball court, at this point, it seems would even go to the designated area. They might, but especially with vaping, they're very used to just pulling out their vape pipe and getting a quick inhale, exhale, and then you just go hit the pickleball again. If no one complains, we don't care, but we do get complaints. Just, I would say not a lot, but it's not like something that we're interested in policing. We're not.
Yeah,
This
see,
would
that's the other
have,
thing.
this wouldn't have even
Well,
been
now,
an issue.
But see, that's the other issue that you're doing. Somebody's gonna have to police, the same way we'd have to police no dogs allowed. You're gonna have to police the no vaping, and no smoking. So Joe's standing outside of Canoa Hills smoking up a storm. And nobody's gone by to yell at him, but you get 4 emails that say he was smoking outside of Canoa Hills.
Mm-hmm.
So who's gonna police it?
With his dog.
With his dog. Yeah,
Wow.
he had a dog.
He was smoking too.
And he was smoking too.
That's pretty serious. I don't know, Bart, what do you think? That sounds,
Well, I want to differentiate between my own personal opinion and the position of the BAC. My personal opinion is that actually I think anybody who wants to smoke on GVR property ought to be permitted to, but no exhaling.
that would solve a lot, actually.
So I as a single board member, one of 12 board members, I have no objection to banning smoking on all GVR property, both inside and out.
Smoking and
However, the
vaping.
recommendation of the Board Affairs Committee is that the board go ahead and ban both smoking and vaping on GVR property wherever it is. I guess from a pragmatic standpoint, there probably aren't enough smokers or vapors to seriously inconvenience by telling them, you're going to have to take 40 or 50 steps maybe off of GVR property if you want to smoke or vape. So while I will vote no on the issue when it comes to the board because of the vaping thing and the fact that there's no evidence that secondhand vaping is harmful, it's not the kind of thing that will prompt me to engage in active protest with signs and chants that the board bans both smoking and vaping.
So do we want to just say no smoking? Because if Scott's telling us to have smoking, he has to set up smoking areas.
Well, so yeah,
So if
sure.
we just say, in accordance with the Arizona statutes, there's no smoking in the buildings and no smoking on the property, period. But we don't say anything about vaping, except all vaping must be at least 20 feet away from the entrance to all buildings.
Well,
And
the statute says nothing
And
about
facilities. Or
It has to
facilities.
be off.
outside.
Yeah, it has to be.
And downwind.
And
See, that's the thing, is that we're trying to set up a policy for 23,000 people when we maybe have 100 that are causing the problem. Why can we not just, when we're at these various facilities or these open area areas, when it bothers people, and I understand it bothers people a lot. I quit smoking 26 years ago. I know nothing about vaping, so I'll defer to Bart or whoever wants to speak about that. Creating a policy for 100 people, and I'll just tell you a little story about a client I had one time in real estate. She had gone through the process of her HOA to get her house painted. Fine, no problem. She painted her house. The HOA came back to her and said, oh, we really don't like that color, so we need you to change it. And she said, no. And they said, well, if you don't change it, we'll take you to court. She said, you go ahead. I have more money than you do. I don't want us to be in the position of spending our money on attorneys for somebody has more money than I have or that we have. And there's always going to be that person that might do that. But are we changing a whole policy for 23,000 people for maybe less than 100?
yeah, that's kind of the question.
That's
that
what
we have
bothers
to-
me.
Yeah, that's the question we have to look at, but Scott's saying, and I think financially, Nellie, you're probably more on top of this. We don't need to spend the money to make smoking areas at all of the facilities.
I don't think so.
You know, they'd have to be at the sports courts, they'd have to be at the facilities,
Right.
they would have to be, but if we said no smoking allowed, maybe we could get Bart to vote yes. And the vaping has to be at least 20 feet away from the facility.
And we already have that policy.
And then your staff is not out there trying to enforce it, but you have something behind them. If you roll up on somebody and they're standing in front of the door vaping, you can go, hey, buddy, 20 feet out. You know, or if I call or send you an email that says Joe's smoking with his dog right outside the door, then, you know, you can go, because you have
Marijuana.
yeah.
Marijuana.
You have the policy to back you up, but if we don't
I
have,
didn't even know.
I don't know,
what
Bart, what do you
smells
think
like.
on that, if we just said no smoking? I
Well,
asked, he took a peek.
I'm just one guy. And as I've said, I would not object. I would vote yes to ban smoking on all of GVR property. However, I also understand staff's position that it's probably easier just to ban both smoking and vaping, in part because from a distance, it's hard to tell whether somebody is smoking or vaping.
I don't know. I don't know.
But
I don't know either.
I think we're creating a problem.
Well, I sort of, yeah, I sort of
me
agree
too.
with you, and I mean, I don't really care about vaping.
that down.
I don't care about vaping, actually, you know, and, like, my main concern is making a mess, and if you're not dropping butts or, you know, around and creating a problem for the staff to clean up, then that's, you know, I go with there's no smoking, but let people vape if they want, I don't care.
But I think at the vaping, they have to be out of the thing. I was sitting in a tennis court the other day, downwind, sitting on a bench, which I needed to be on, the guy up here, and then when the vaping might not hurt me, but when that big cloud comes, I mean, he was puffing on. And that cloud comes through it, I wasn't worried about damage, I was just very uncomfortable. So they need to be out of the court.
Okay, thank you.
I mean, the comfort of
Yeah, you know,
other people that don't do it.
And if we post it,
Yeah.
if we post it that says no vaping on the courts, then at least you as a tennis player can say, can't you read the sign?
Yeah.
You know, or
Smoking or vaping.
Normally.
I have a question which maybe is not our decision, but, if you get multiple complaints about a particular person that refuses to get off the tennis court or wherever, and he's vaping, what is the punishment or fine, or you're gonna be suspended for 3 days or a week, or what's?
Well, right now, we don't have a policy on vaping,
But if
so
we don't, I mean, if we did.
if
say-
we did, then yeah, I think I think we would look at it as you're violating the policy repeatedly. I could see that becoming a code of conduct.
Mhm.
Yeah, see, that's what I'm
Concern.
thinking, the code of conduct, you don't
Sure.
have to have a specific policy for smoking and vaping. It's still a code of conduct that somebody can file a complaint about. And if you get the same person over and over and over again, what good does it do us? And I know we're gonna be looking at this next year for code of conduct policy, but what good does it do to have that same person come in and get their hand slapped? Because there's no teeth really to the code of conduct.
well, there is some. Nellie, did you have something you were
Yes.
trying to
Yeah.
insert?
Yes.
Sorry.
No, I mean, I think we went out with, to the members and asked them, about the smoking. I think they were very clear, 88%. And I agree, we didn't ask about the vaping, so in some ways, I think the issue of fact that there's not, butts on the, there's not staff time, or you don't need benches or ashtrays for vaping. So from a fiscal standpoint, there's not a cost to vaping. So I would tend to say, let's support the members' ban on smoking within all of our GVR campuses and vaping within 20 feet of it, and then you have to post it, you know, like on the pickleball courts or tennis
Sure.
courts or
The
the outside
entrances.
courts, that just, you just gotta move away
Shoot off the
from it,
courts.
and that would be kind of the compromise. And then if you get continued complaints, then you go
Then we
back to the
deal with
members
it.
and ask them,
Yeah.
not put the
Yeah.
vaping on, you
Yeah.
know, but
Barb?
now the members have only spoken about smoking.
Just a final observation from me, just because it's interesting to me. I expected at some point that we would get some pushback, not from the smokers, because smokers are essentially treated as lepers in modern society. I thought that we would get some pushback from the vapors, either at BAC or some kind of email to Scott or the board or somebody. And what's interesting to me is that at least so far, it's been complete silence from the vapors, even after the article in the local newspaper. So, you know, Nancy can tell us if there's any online vapors who are hyperventilating right now. But it's intriguing to me. You know, if we don't get any vapors showing up in the audience on the 22nd, you know, that to me is, you know, carte blanche. Do what you want about vaping, because there doesn't seem to be a constituency that opposes restriction.
But the law, you're telling us though that the law doesn't say vaping, it says smoking, correct?
Correct. Yeah, the Arizona
So
statute talks
if
about,
we,
and the
20,
Arizona
but if
statute talks
we-
about smoking indoors and within
Indoors.
20 feet of a building. It doesn't say
Okay.
anything about smoking on property.
and us being private and being a private organization, we can say no smoking allowed on the premises, period.
Okay.
Absolutely. I mean, we can tell people not to wear
And then we
lipstick
can
or
let the
perfume.
leave the
Not to wear
vaping,
Shorts and bare feet.
then we can.
Good one, Beth.
Good one, Beth. We could leave the vaping off for now
That's good.
because it's not gonna require a special area. We can say all vaping must be not on the courts or not on the facilities or 20 feet away, something
Yes.
so that it protects people who are on the courts.
Right.
And then at least start with that, Scott, would you?
I think that's
agree with that?
reasonable. I mean, I agree. I think that's a reasonable compromise. It'd be very easy to implement that. You know, we would just have to do some signage that says no vape, I mean, certainly no smoking and no vaping within 20 feet of the entrance or on any sports courts.
Yeah.
Yes, that would work.
Yeah, because you're gonna have them doing, when I first moved here, there was one guy I played with, he was my partner unfortunately, and he did smoke. He went out with a cigarette dangling out of his mouth and played tennis. It was like, how can you swing a racket, smoke and
Yeah.
puff at the same time? And I'm sure they can figure out how to do it. Let me ask you, our audience, do you have any input on this? Any thoughts?
No smoking in 20 foot is very reasonable.
Well, and that's the
No.
law. That's the law.
No, but I mean for vaping.
For
In
vaping,
20 foot,
for
yeah.
vaping.
April?
April?
I just don't see any reason for anybody to smoke on GVR property at all, but. I mean, I think the 20 foot rule is reasonable without a query of the membership.
What about vaping?
Yeah, I meant.
You're
She meant vaping.
Yeah, I think they're talking about the vaping.
Yeah.
So Bart, would you be okay to change this to come to the board, what, in January, Scott?
Yeah, it's
So
on the,
just take out the vaping and put in that the vaping cannot be within 20 feet of any GVR facility or sports
sure.
court or.
We can write
However
that
you
up
wanna
for you,
write that
Bart,
up.
or you can do it.
You know, why cater to me?
Yeah.
I'm just one guy. As I've said before, I'm sure
BAC
smokers as
came
if
up
they
with
were.
this.
Scott will get it.
BAC came up with this wording.
Okay, all
Or
right.
we could still make
But
a
it wasn't,
motion.
yeah,
We
but
could keep this because that's BAC's recommendation.
Right.
So we could still make a
we can still
motion to
change
say.
it.
No, I know, but I'm
smoking,
just saying,
but-
that's right.
But
Well-
it wasn't as big a discussion at BAC as it's been here.
As it's
Right.
been here.
Yeah.
So I think if we come back in January,
Mhm.
Scott, if we could just have it so it's written, so there's no smoking on the facilities.
Sure.
And vaping is allowed, but has to be 20 feet, at least 20 feet away.
From entrances
From
and not on
entrances,
sports
Not on
courts.
sports courts. And then they can go out and vape and make it back to
I
your
could
meeting.
even, you know, I can go with that.
Yeah.
I only brought it forward because I had a number of people that complained about it,
We have to put signs.
you know, just townwide. and-
Probably,
And
yeah,
they
especially at a
did
sports
respond
course
to the
mostly.
survey, but they weren't the majority.
You know-
Yeah, and we didn't ask about vaping, Nellie?
yeah, yes, you
Well,
can.
when you say come
But
back.
then it's harder to enforce.
Yeah,
I want to hear what Dave just said.
I said, do we have
I'm
to put
sorry,
up
I have the
signs?
floor.
And Scott said not necessarily, and I don't see why we should have to put signs up.
I think the only
As
thing,
long
if
as
I,
it's in our
yeah,
corporate.
we can do that. I do think there's a couple locations where we've had more complaints. It'd be easier
And maybe
to
put a
enforce it
sign
at
up
just
there.
those locations. We don't have to sign the
I
whole
just hate to see
campus.
signs up everywhere.
We do too.
Just-
It's visual pollution and it's
Yeah.
expensive.
Nellie,
again,
did you,
yeah.
now I had a
No, I
question.
don't know, I have
Yeah,
more.
I put rec
So-
I mean, some 6 to 8 years ago.
BAC as a committee has made a recommendation, so we have their recommendation in front of us. What we're talking about is an alternative option to it. So doesn't BAC have to present its recommendation and then we amend it? Am I right, Nancy? Yeah, that's how it's done. So the narrative stays the same as BAC's recommendation and board option is this, and then we move the board option. Do you have to present the BAC option? Right, okay.
Right, Bart?
Yeah, I mean, the recommendation of the BAC is the recommendation of the BAC. But I've heard a couple of board members in the last 5 minutes say, well, we didn't ask about vaping. Yes, we did. I mean, the question that was propounded to the membership said, do you want to ban smoking and vaping? So the membership has been asked about it.
Good.
Oh, that's,
There was no way for the membership to split out smoking from vaping.
got it, okay.
I just wanted to clarify that.
Thank you, that's important.
Yeah.
But we can do that at the meeting. We can take your recommendation from BAC and someone can make a motion that we ban smoking from the facilities and we not allow vaping within 20 feet or on a sport court.
You can have that listed as a motion, you can have it as an option.
Can we list that as an
Of
option?
course, yeah.
Okay.
We will
Yeah.
provide an update on a summary of this discussion, consensus at this meeting, as well as what the BAC recommended, and then in our options, we'll provide both.
Okay.
That works, yeah, that works.
Right, great.
Right.
We good enough on this one?
Yes.
Okay, I want to, before we
You
move
sure?
to member comments.
A little more.
I want to just real quickly say that Scott
Yes.
has finished his one more year of evaluation with us.
Oh, Yeah.
And he hasn't rejected what we've offered him and he hasn't quit, so we want to.
why would I do that? Reject that.
Yeah, but he has to bring his treats every other meeting. Marlon does a good job. Are there any comments from the audience? I like that, the audience.
It's amazing how painting no pets on the sidewalk has stirred up World War III.
Yeah.
When the policy manual has always stated all along, the one thing that I think caused more controversy than anything in the comments was the one time when they opened up the one pool, because they were gonna drain it the next day or whatever. It's been several years ago, but they let all the dogs come in.
Right, and let the dogs go.
Oh, and that one special event has suddenly opened the doors for all kinds
Oh,
of.
boy. We haven't done that for a few years, but we used to do paws in the pool because it was a fun event and
Yeah.
we haven't done that for a while, but
Vaping in them.
We're gonna do vaping. We're gonna do.
the dogs liked it. It was fun. You know.
Special policy, yeah.
Special policy.
We haven't done it for a while. I think
I
that's
know,
why.
but people have long-term memory. They can't remember where they were yesterday, but they can remember what happened 6 years ago.
Sure,
And
sure. That's true.
Okay, no other comments? April? Aren't you just excited about coming on this board?
I am.
Okay, I'll
Fun times.
entertain a motion to
So
adjourn.
move.
I thought you would.
Jim? I had to do it.
Jim has moved
I
to
would've done
adjourn
it
and
then.
Barbara has seconded the motion at 3:15. Those in favor?
In favor.
Unanimous.
Yeah.
Thank you. You guys are doing a great job.
It's 9 minutes before I had to leave.
See, it said 3:20. It said 3:20.
You can get them. I mean, if I ever wanted to go back. Yeah. So I had to say. What I do is when